The morning sun cast long shadows across the immaculately manicured gardens of Rosewood Manor as Eleanor Matthews stood at her bedroom window, her steel-grey hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. At 62, she carried herself with the grace and authority that came from decades of managing one of Boston's most prestigious pharmaceutical companies alongside her late husband, Charles. The estate's sprawling gardens had become her sanctuary since Charles's passing 2 years ago, but lately they'd transformed into something more, a source of intrigue centered around the mysterious man who had breathed new life into them over the past 8 months. Marcus Chen wasn't your typical gardener. At 45, he possessed a quiet intensity that Eleanor found impossible to ignore. His methods were unconventional, but the results were undeniable. Under his care, plants that had struggled for years now thrived with unprecedented vigor. Roses bloomed out of season, and vegetables grew to sizes that defied explanation. "Mrs. Matthews?" Sarah, her longtime housekeeper, appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Chen is requesting to speak with you. He says it's urgent." Eleanor's heart quickened, though she maintained her composed exterior. "Tell him I'll meet him in the conservatory in 15 minutes. As she made her way through the mansion's marble halls, Eleanor's mind wandered to the rumors circulating among Boston's elite about her growing closeness to the gardener. The whispers had intensified after she'd begun spending hours with Marcus, discussing his innovative cultivation techniques and watching him work his seeming magic on her withering greenhouse. The conservatory was bathed in morning light when Eleanor entered. Marcus stood with his back to her, examining a cluster of orchids that had recently exploded into bloom. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and Eleanor was struck again by the intelligence in his dark eyes. "Mrs. Matthews," he began, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness she'd never heard before. "I need to show you something." He led her to a section of the greenhouse she rarely visited, where rows of experimental plants grew in carefully controlled conditions. "What you're about to see must remain between us," he said, pulling back a heavy canvas covering. Eleanor gasped. Before her stood plants she recognized from her pharmaceutical company's research division, rare medicinal specimens that typically took years to cultivate. But these were different. They were mature, robust, and ready for harvest in what should have been impossible time. "How?" she whispered, reaching out to touch a leaf in wonder. "I've developed a cultivation method that accelerates growth while maintaining, even enhancing, the plant's medicinal properties," Marcus explained, his usual confidence returning. "But I need resources to perfect it, to prove its viability on a larger scale." Eleanor's mind raced with the implications. Her company had been struggling since Charles's death, losing ground to competitors who could produce similar compounds more quickly and cheaply. This could change everything. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Because I need a partner, Mrs. Matthews. Someone with the infrastructure and influence to help bring this to the world. And because I've come to trust you." The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor found herself studying his face, the determination in his jaw, the slight graying at his temples, the warmth in his eyes that seemed to hold secrets beyond just agricultural innovation. "The board would never accept an unofficial collaboration," she said slowly, testing the waters. "They barely tolerate my leadership as it is, seeing me as nothing more than Charles's widow keeping his seat warm." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "Then perhaps we need to make it official." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not just proposing a business partnership, Eleanor." The use of her first name sent a shiver down her spine. She knew what he was suggesting, a solution that would silence the gossips and give them both what they needed. Marriage. It was practical, logical even. Yet the flutter in her stomach suggested this was about more than just business. "You understand what you're proposing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The scrutiny we'd face? The accusations that would follow?" "I understand perfectly," he replied. "Perfectly." his gaze unwavering. "The question is, are you willing to face it with me?" Before Eleanor could respond, the conservatory door burst open. Thomas Whitmore, her company's CFO and Charles's oldest friend, stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" he demanded, striding toward them. "The board meeting started 10 minutes ago, and here I find you with—" He cast a disdainful glance at Marcus. The help? The moment shattered. But something had already been set in motion. Eleanor straightened her spine, years of boardroom battles steeling her resolve. "Thomas, I'll be there shortly. Mr. Chen was just showing me some fascinating developments in plant cultivation that could benefit the company." "Benefit the company?" Thomas scoffed. "Eleanor, you need to focus on reality. The board is meeting right now to discuss replacing you. Your leadership is being questioned, and this, whatever this is, isn't helping your case." As Thomas stormed out, Eleanor turned back to Marcus, whose expression had hardened into something unreadable. The weight of the decision before her pressed down like a physical force. In one direction lay safety, propriety, and the slow decline of everything she and Charles had built. In the other, "I'll need time to consider your proposal," she said carefully, though her heart was racing. "Both aspects of it." Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them. "Of course. But Eleanor," he called as she turned to leave, "time may not be on our side." As Eleanor hurried to the board meeting, her mind whirled with possibilities. She didn't notice Marcus watching her go, nor did she see him pull out his phone and dial a number with trembling fingers. "It's done," he said quietly into the receiver. "The seed has been planted. But I'm not sure I can go through with the rest of the plan. She's not what we thought. Want to discover the shocking truth about Marcus's real identity? Keep watching until the end. What happens next will change everything." The board meeting was exactly the ambush Thomas had warned about. Eleanor sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, her posture rigid as she faced down 12 stern faces. Men who had been her husband's friends and allies, now turned hostile. "The numbers don't lie, Eleanor," Richard Caldwell, the head of research and development, declared while sliding financial reports across the polished surface. "We've lost 3 major contracts in the past quarter. Our stock is down 15% since Charles's passing, and our newest drug trials are months behind schedule. All temporary setbacks," Eleanor countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "If you'll look at the proposal I've prepared—" "We've seen enough proposals," Thomas interrupted, standing to command the room's attention. "What we need is decisive action. The board has decided to bring in external leadership, someone with fresh perspective." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows, but decades of corporate politics had taught her to keep her expression neutral. "And who might this leader be?" Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "James Porter." The name hung in the air like a thundercloud. James Porter, her husband's former protege who had left the company 5 years ago after a bitter dispute with Charles. The same James Porter who had tried to push the company towards synthetic alternatives rather than natural compounds, arguing that traditional cultivation methods were obsolete. "James would destroy everything Charles built," Eleanor said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "His vision for this company, Charles is gone." "Eleanor," Thomas cut in, his tone gentler now but no less firm. "And with him, the luxury of clinging to outdated methods. We're giving you 2 weeks to either show us a concrete plan for turning things around or to step down gracefully." As the board members filed out, Eleanor remained seated, her mind racing back to Marcus's greenhouse and his impossible plants. She had anticipated opposition to their potential partnership, but this threat to her leadership changed everything. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The drive to Marcus's cottage at the edge of the estate felt longer than usual. Eleanor's hands gripped the steering wheel as questions tumbled through her mind. How had he achieved those remarkable growth rates? Why choose to reveal his breakthrough to her now, just when she needed it most? The cottage came into view, a modest structure nearly hidden by the experimental gardens that surrounded it. Eleanor had given Marcus permission to use this land for his research, but she realized she'd never actually visited his private workspace before. She found him in his personal greenhouse, bent over a sophisticated monitoring system that seemed out of place among the dirt and vegetation. At the sound of her footsteps, he straightened quickly, subtly moving to block her view of the equipment. "Eleanor," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." "The board meeting ended early," she replied, studying his face. "They're bringing in James Porter to replace me." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes at the name. Recognition, fear, but it was gone so quickly Eleanor couldn't be sure. "Then you understand why we need to move quickly," he said, leading her toward a different section of the greenhouse. "Let me show you more of what my method can do." But Eleanor stood her ground. "First, I need to know everything, Marcus. Who you really are, where this technology came from, and why you chose my company." Marcus went still, and for a moment, Eleanor saw something raw and vulnerable cross his features. He moved to a weathered desk in the corner and pulled out a worn leather folder. "I wasn't always a gardener," he began, spreading out papers that Eleanor recognized as academic credentials and research papers. "I was a biochemist at Porter Pharmaceuticals." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "You worked for James?" Marcus nodded grimly. "I led their botanical research division. We were working on acceleration techniques similar to what I've shown you, but James, he wanted to take shortcuts, ignore safety protocols. When I objected, he buried my research and forced me out." "Why didn't you come forward? File a complaint?" "Against someone with James's connections." Marcus gave a bitter laugh. "I tried. Every door closed in my face, but I never stopped my research. I knew there was a way to achieve what we'd started, ethically and safely. When I learned about the position here at Rosewood Manor, it seemed like fate." Eleanor's mind was spinning. "So everything, the gardens, your interest in the company, in me, it was all about revenge against James." "No," Marcus said quickly, reaching for her hand. "It started that way, perhaps. But Eleanor, what I've found here, what we could build together, it's so much more than that." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Mr. Whitmore is at the mansion asking for you. Says it's urgent." Eleanor looked back at Marcus, really seeing him now. The passion in his eyes, the genuine concern on his face. "Come to dinner tonight," she said decisively. 8 o'clock. "If we're going to do this, we need to plan carefully." As she drove back to the mansion, Eleanor didn't see Marcus make another phone call, his hands shaking slightly as he dialed. "She knows part of it," he said quietly, "but not everything. Not about the samples or about Charles." Thomas Whitmore was waiting in her study, his face grave. "Eleanor, there's something you need to see." He placed a file on her desk. "Our security team found some irregularities in the background check for Marcus Chen. The man working in your garden, he's not who he claims to be." Eleanor opened the file, her heart pounding. The first photograph showed Marcus, years younger, in a laboratory coat. He was standing next to Charles and James Porter. The second photograph made her blood run cold. It was a news clipping dated just before Charles's death, headlined, "Experimental Botanical Research Facility Destroyed in Suspicious Fire." And there, listed among the missing research materials, samples of a revolutionary growth compound developed by a team led by Dr. Marcus Chen and Charles Matthews. Eleanor sank into her chair, the pieces starting to align in a pattern she didn't want to see. What had Charles been involved in? And more importantly, what was growing in her garden, in the greenhouse? Marcus stared at his phone, at a message just received. "Time to move to phase 2. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. Remember what's at stake." The experimental plants around him seemed to pulse with unnatural vigor in the fading afternoon light, their secrets still untold. If this story has captured your heart, hit subscribe now to never miss our daily tales of love, mystery, and unexpected twists. Eleanor stared at the dinner table set for 2, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier above. Her mind kept returning to the file Thomas had shown her, to the photograph of Marcus standing with Charles. How had she missed it? The signs had been there all along: Marcus's sophisticated knowledge of pharmaceuticals, his advanced understanding of chemical compounds, his perfectly tailored cultivation methods. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock. Marcus stood on her doorstep, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that made him look more like the biochemist he truly was than the gardener he'd pretended to be. He held a bottle of wine and a small wooden box. "Come in," Eleanor said, her voice carefully neutral. She led him to the dining room, where Sarah had laid out an elegant meal. The housekeeper gave Marcus a cold look before departing. News traveled fast among the staff. "You look troubled," Marcus observed as they sat down. "Has something changed since this afternoon?" Eleanor took a sip of water, buying time. "Tell me about the fire at the research facility." The color drained from Marcus's face. His hands, usually so steady when handling delicate plants, trembled slightly as he placed his napkin in his lap. "How did you... Does it matter? What matters is that you lied to me. You knew Charles. You worked with him. And now I find out there was a fire, destroyed research, missing samples." She leaned forward. "What really happened to my husband, Marcus?" Marcus closed his eyes briefly, as if steeling himself. When he opened them, they were filled with a pain that looked genuine. "Charles was a good man, Eleanor. He was trying to protect everyone, the company, the research, you. Protect us from what? From James Porter, from what he wanted to do with our discovery." Marcus reached for the wooden box he'd brought, placing it carefully on the table between them. "What I showed you in the greenhouse, it's only a fraction of what we developed. Charles and we found something revolutionary. Not just accelerated growth, but enhanced medicinal properties, natural compounds that could revolutionize drug development without synthetic alternatives." Eleanor's mind raced back to the last few months of Charles's life. His late nights at the office, his distraction, his increasing paranoia about corporate espionage. "The board wants to bring James in to replace me," she said quietly. "Why now? After all these years?" "Because he knows." Marcus's voice was grim. "He knows I'm here, and he knows what's growing in your garden. The same things we were developing before the fire." He opened the box, revealing a small vial of luminescent green liquid. "This is the original compound. Charles helped me hide it the night of the fire, the night before he..." The implication hung heavy in the air. Eleanor's hands began to shake. "Are you saying, James, that Charles's heart attack wasn't natural? I've spent 3 years trying to prove it. That's why I came here, why I took the gardening position. I needed access to the company's records, and I needed to protect you. Charles made me promise..." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah appeared, her face pale. "Mrs. Matthews, Mr. Whitmore is here with the police." Eleanor's heart stopped. Through the dining room window, she could see police lights reflecting off the manicured hedges of her garden. Marcus moved with surprising speed, grabbing the wooden box and the vial. "Eleanor, listen to me," he said urgently. "Everything I told you about my feelings, about wanting a partnership, that was real. But there's more at stake here than either of us. Charles discovered something in the research, something James would kill to possess. I need you to trust me." The sound of footsteps in the hallway grew closer. Eleanor had seconds to decide. She looked at Marcus, the man who had lied to her, who might have been involved in her husband's death, who had somehow made her feel alive again after years of grief. In his eyes, she saw fear, determination, and something else, a desperate kind of hope. "The conservatory," she whispered. "There's a service door behind the orchids. The key is..." The dining room door burst open. Thomas stood there with 2 police officers, his face a mask of righteous concern. "Eleanor, step away from him. Chen, or whatever your real name is, you're under arrest for corporate espionage and suspected connection to the death of Charles Matthews." But Marcus was already moving. The box clutched to his chest. He backed toward the French doors leading to the garden. "Eleanor, check Charles's old study, behind the painting of Rosewood Manor. You'll find proof of everything." One of the officers drew his weapon. "Freeze!" Instead, Marcus threw something on the ground, one of his experimental plant pods. It burst into a cloud of dense, sweet-smelling spores. In the chaos that followed, Eleanor heard breaking glass and running footsteps. When the air cleared, Marcus was gone. On the dinner table, he'd left behind a single piece of paper. Eleanor snatched it before Thomas could see, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it in her lap. It was a photograph she'd never seen before, taken in what looked like a laboratory. Charles stood with Marcus, both smiling, holding up a tiny plant that seemed to glow with an inner light. On the back was written a series of numbers and 2 words in Charles's handwriting: "Trust him." "Eleanor?" Thomas's voice was gentle as he approached her. "I know this is a shock, but there's something else you need to know. The board meeting tomorrow. James Porter isn't just coming to take over the company. He's bringing proof that Charles's death wasn't from natural causes, and he claims to have evidence that you were involved." Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Through the window, she could see police officers searching the gardens with flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness where Marcus had vanished. In the distance, her husband's precious conservatory loomed like a crystal palace, hiding secrets she was only beginning to understand. What had Charles discovered? What was Marcus really protecting? And most importantly, who could she trust when it seemed every truth in her life had been built on carefully constructed lies? In her greenhouse office, a computer screen flickered to life, security footage playing in reverse. Charles entering his study late at night, Marcus in a lab coat, James Porter holding a vial of glowing liquid. And in the corner of the frame, a figure Eleanor didn't recognize, watching it all unfold. The game was bigger than she had imagined, and she was running out of time to learn the rules. Stunned by these revelations? Make sure you're subscribed. New breathtaking stories like this one arrive daily. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight as Eleanor stood in Charles's study, staring at the painting of Rosewood Manor. After hours of police questioning and Thomas's endless concerned hovering, she was finally alone. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the heavy gilt frame from the wall, revealing a wall safe she'd never known existed. The combination Marcus had slipped her during dinner's chaos worked perfectly. Charles's birthday, followed by the day they'd met. The safe's door swung open with a soft click, revealing a leather-bound journal and a USB drive. Eleanor's heart pounded as she opened the journal to its final entry, dated the day before Charles died. M's breakthrough is beyond anything we imagined. Not just accelerated growth, the plants are producing compounds that could revolutionize medicine. Natural remedies more potent than any synthetic drug without side effects. But Jay has corrupted the research. The tests he's running, people could die. I have to stop him. If anything happens to me, the truth is in the greenhouse. Section C, row 7, pod 13. E will know what to do. The last line made Eleanor's blood run cold. She'd always thought Charles's paranoia in his final days had been stress-induced. Now she wasn't so sure. Her laptop hummed to life as she inserted the USB drive. Files populated the screen, research data, email correspondence, and video recordings. She clicked on the most recent video, dated 3 days before Charles's death. Charles's face filled the screen, looking haggard and nervous. "Eleanor, if you're watching this, something's happened to me. What Marcus and I discovered, it's not just about plant growth. The compound affects human cellular regeneration. James wants to weaponize it, create biological agents that could... God, I can't even say it. Marcus has the only pure sample left. Trust him, Eleanor. He's not who he seems, but he's the only one who can protect the research. And you." The video ended abruptly. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, pieces clicking into place. The exceptional growth rates in Marcus's garden weren't just about plants. They were proof of concept for something far more significant. A soft noise from the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps. Too quiet to be the police guards Thomas had insisted on posting outside. Eleanor quickly pocketed the USB drive and grabbed Charles's journal, her heart racing. The study door opened slowly, revealing a familiar figure. Sarah, her housekeeper, stood in the doorway, but something was different. Gone was the subservient posture, replaced by an alertness that seemed almost predatory. "Mrs. Matthews," she said, her voice carrying none of its usual warmth, "I'm afraid I can't let you leave with those." "How long?" Eleanor asked, suddenly understanding. "How long have you been watching me for James?" Sarah's smile was cold. "Since before Charles died. James likes to be thorough." She held out her hand. "The journal and drive, please. It'll be easier this way." "Easier than what happened to Charles? Your husband's death was unfortunate but necessary. He wouldn't see reason. James hoped you'd be more cooperative." Eleanor's mind raced. The police were outside, but calling for help would mean explaining the journal, the research, everything she'd just discovered. She needed time. "The research data," she said carefully. "It's not just in these files, is it? There's more in the greenhouse, in Section C." Sarah's expression flickered with interest. "Show me." The walk to the conservatory felt endless. Eleanor's heels clicked against the marble floors as Sarah followed close behind, one hand in her jacket pocket. The night air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers as they entered the greenhouse. "Section C is this way," Eleanor said, leading them deeper into the maze of plants. Her hand brushed against a vine, and she remembered Marcus's warning about his experimental specimens. Some of them had unusual properties. She stopped at row 7, pretending to search for pod 13. "It should be right. Here!" In one fluid motion, Eleanor grabbed a hanging vine and yanked it hard. The plant burst, releasing a cloud of spores similar to what Marcus had used during his escape. Sarah stumbled back, coughing. Eleanor ran, clutching the journal and drive, but she'd only made it halfway to the door when a sharp pain exploded in her shoulder. She stumbled, her vision blurring. "Tranquilizer dart?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away. "Don't worry, you'll wake up. James wants to explain everything personally." As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Eleanor saw movement among the plants. A familiar figure stepped out of the shadows, moving silently behind Sarah. "Actually," Marcus's voice was cold and clear, "James won't be explaining anything." Eleanor's world faded to black as chaos erupted in the greenhouse. The last thing she heard was breaking glass and Sarah's startled cry. She awoke to the taste of mint and something sweet. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open to find herself in Marcus's cottage, lying on a small cot. Sunlight streamed through windows crowded with unusual plants. Her shoulder ached, but her mind was surprisingly clear. "Medicinal tea," Marcus said, noticing her gaze on the cup beside her. "One of my more successful experiments. How do you feel?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Eleanor groaned, sitting up slowly. Sarah, detained. The police found her trying to break into the company's secure servers, along with evidence of her connection to James and, he hesitated, to Charles's death. Eleanor's hand found the journal she'd still somehow held onto through everything. Charles knew, didn't he? About all of it. The research, what it could do, what James was planning. Marcus nodded grimly. Charles discovered that James had been testing an unstable version of the compound on unknowing patients. The results were devastating. When Charles threatened to expose everything, James acted. Sarah was his insurance policy, planted to monitor you afterward. And you, where do you really fit into all this? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression pained. "I was CIA, Scientific Research Division. We'd been tracking James's illegal experiments for months. Charles was my contact, helping us gather evidence. When he died, I went underground, took the gardening position to stay close, protect you, and finish what we started. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Because the less you knew, the safer you were. But now," he reached for a tablet, showing her news headlines that were just breaking. "Pharmaceutical CEO James Porter, arrested in connection with illegal human trials and corporate espionage." "It's over, almost." Marcus sat beside her, taking her hand. "Eleanor, what Charles and I discovered, it could help millions, but it needs to be developed properly, ethically. The company needs strong leadership to make that happen. Leadership that understands both the science and the human cost of rushing results. Eleanor thought of Charles's final message, of the trust he'd placed in both of them. "We could do it together," she said softly. "A real partnership this time. No more secrets." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes. "No more secrets," he agreed. But first, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, different from the one that had held the research sample. "I believe we had discussed making things official." Eleanor opened the box to find a simple but elegant ring. Inside the band was an inscription, "Where truth blooms." But before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. What she read made her blood run cold. "Marcus," she whispered, "James escaped custody, and he's coming here. Is your heart racing? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat." Dawn painted the sky in shades of purple and gold as Eleanor and Marcus worked frantically in the greenhouse, preparing for what they knew was coming. They had minutes, maybe hours at most, before James arrived. The police were on their way, but the morning traffic would slow their response. "We need to destroy the research," Marcus said, gathering critical samples. "All of it. James can't be allowed to—" "No!" Eleanor's voice was firm as she typed rapidly on her laptop. Charles's USB drive glowing blue in the port. "We're not destroying anything. That's what James wants. All evidence gone. Nothing left to prove what he did." She looked up at Marcus, her eyes bright with determination. "Charles died protecting this research, protecting the chance to help people. I won't let that die too." Marcus studied her face, seeing the same strength that had first drawn him to her. "What's your plan?" "A live broadcast. I'm logged into the company's emergency shareholder communication system. Every major investor, board member, and regulatory official will see exactly what James has been doing." She held up Charles's journal. "And exactly what this research could really accomplish." A sound from outside made them both freeze. Tires on gravel. Eleanor's fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating the broadcast. Marcus moved to the greenhouse door, every inch the trained operative he truly was. "Eleanor!" James Porter's voice carried across the gardens, smooth and confident despite everything. "Let's talk about this reasonably." Through the greenhouse glass, Eleanor could see him approaching, tall, handsome, expertly dressed even as a fugitive. He looked exactly as she remembered from company events, charming, polished, and utterly ruthless. "It's over." "James," she called back, her voice steady, "the board knows everything. The FBI is on their way." James's laugh was chilling. "The board? They've already received documents showing your complicity in Charles's death, your secret meetings with Marcus, the unauthorized research in your greenhouse. Who do you think they'll believe? The grieving widow gone rogue, or the man Charles himself trained to lead?" "They'll believe the truth," Eleanor said, pressing the final key to start the broadcast. Red lights blinked on multiple cameras throughout the greenhouse, everything now streaming live to hundreds of shareholders and officials. James noticed the lights too late. His polished mask slipped for a moment, revealing something dark and desperate underneath. "I can't let you do this." He reached into his jacket. Marcus moved with incredible speed, but James was ready. The gun barked twice, shattering glass. Marcus dove behind a table of plants as Eleanor ducked beneath her desk. "You don't understand what's at stake," James shouted, advancing into the greenhouse. "This research could revolutionize biological warfare. Imagine weapons that target specific genetic markers, plants that could devastate entire agricultural systems, compounds that could bring nations to their knees." "That's not what this was meant for," Marcus called from behind his cover. "Charles wanted to help people, not destroy them. Charles was weak, just like you, Marcus, just like all of you, so focused on playing it safe that you can't see the bigger picture." Eleanor's hand brushed something under her desk. A small case she recognized from Marcus's cottage. Inside was a syringe filled with pale green liquid. "The pure compound," Marcus had explained earlier. "In its natural form, it accelerates healing. But in high doses, James's footsteps drew closer. Eleanor could hear Marcus trying to circle around, but James had him pinned down. The broadcast continued, capturing every word, every movement. "One last chance. Eleanor," James called, his voice eerily calm. "Stand down. We can still work together. Think of what we could accomplish." Eleanor looked at the syringe in her hand, then at Charles's journal open on her desk. The final pages detailed the compound's effects in high doses, rapid cellular acceleration, overwhelming the system. She stood slowly, hands raised. "You're right, James. Let me show you what we've accomplished." As James turned toward her, triumph in his eyes, Eleanor moved. She wasn't a trained agent like Marcus, but she had grown up around horses, and her muscle memory was good. The syringe plunged into James's neck before he could react. His eyes widened in recognition. "What did you—" He staggered, the gun falling from nerveless fingers. "No, no!" "The pure compound," Eleanor said quietly. "Charles's final version. You wanted to see its full potential. Watch." James clutched his throat, gasping. His skin began to change, cells regenerating and dying at impossible speeds. He reached for Eleanor with a shaking hand, but Marcus was there, pulling her back as James collapsed. It was over, in moments. Where James had stood was only empty clothes, his cells having accelerated through their entire natural lifespan in minutes. The greenhouse was silent, except for the soft whir of fans and the steady blink of broadcast lights. Eleanor leaned against Marcus, exhausted and shaking, but certain. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," she said clearly, looking directly into the nearest camera, "you've seen the truth about James Porter. Now let me show you the real potential of our research." She moved to Section C, Row 7, Pod 13, where Charles had hidden his most important work. Inside was a single plant, its leaves shimmering with an inner light, but unlike James's corrupted versions, this one pulsed with vital, natural energy. This is what Charles and Marcus discovered. Not a weapon, but a key to understanding cellular regeneration, natural compounds that could revolutionize medicine, help crops resist disease, and accelerate healing. Used properly, ethically, it could change millions of lives for the better. She felt Marcus's hand slip into hers as she continued. "I'm calling for an emergency board session. It's time to redirect this company back to its true purpose, helping people. Those in favor?" The greenhouse computers chimed as votes poured in. One by one, board members voiced their support, their shock at James's confession evident. Hours later, as police collected evidence and federal agents secured the scene, Eleanor and Marcus stood in the garden where their story had begun. The ring he'd given her caught the morning light. "Think Charles would approve?" she asked softly. Marcus smiled, pulling her close. "Of you taking control, of us working together to realize his dream the right way. I think he planned it all along." Eleanor laughed softly, then grew serious. "We'll have to be careful with the research. There will be others like James. We'll face them together," Marcus promised. "No more secrets, no more lies, just truth, growing in the light." As if in response, the garden around them seemed to pulse with life, Charles's legacy blooming in every flower and leaf. Eleanor touched the ring on her finger, thinking of cycles ending and beginning, of death and rebirth, of love growing in unexpected places. Above them, the morning sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing Rosewood Manor in golden light. In the greenhouse, Charles's special plant continued to glow, a beacon of hope for the future they would build together. And in Eleanor's pocket, one final secret waited to be discovered. A handwritten note from Charles, dated years ago, with words that would change everything once again. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. But there's one last thing you need to know about Marcus. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? Would you have trusted Marcus despite his secrets? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For subscribe, like, next video. If this story touched your heart, hit like and subscribe. You won't want to miss the powerful story waiting for you on the left of your screen. Trust me, it will captivate you just as much